something I haven't seen before. I have 3 ribs on this rudder bill, and it has airfoil on one side only. I cannot tell, looking at this picture of Skip's climber, which side the airfoil is on. I didn't notice before the dihedral on the stabilizer. I see it now that I've built the stabilizer. But which side the airfoil goes on, I got an idea on it. I got some thoughts on it. But first, can we take a moment to appreciate Skip's color scheme? Besides his workmanship, it's gorgeous. Maroon, orange, yellow. Maroon, orange, yellow. It simple but very appealing to the eye color scheme. I'd like to get that model in my hands, check it out, now that I've at least got this far into the build. I think I'd be able to appreciate it better. Here's what I'm figuring. When I put one of these ribs down on the plan, I can see where the printed notches, bottom, top, and so on. And I can also see these 16th by 16th balsa pieces. This one's on the bottom, this one's on the top, and so on. So the airfoil is going to be on the left side of the rudder. And here's what I am thinking about that. This airfoil is a built-in trim setting. And it's one of those settings that will only have an effect on one phase of the flight of a free flight model. The other reason I'm pretty sure it builds this way is flat side down. Pretty simple. It'll set flat on the board. So I have all my printed pieces, the last of them cut out. I'm going to start building this rudder and also talk a little more about trim settings while I'm building. I got all the notches sanded now for the ribs, and I followed the lines on the print for these notches also. I have the sub rudder completely framed, outline done on the rudder. Now I can start laying in the bottom 16th inch stringers. I said when I was talking about this airfoil being a built-in trim setting that there are trim settings that are only effective on certain phases of the flight. What I'm talking about is the 3 phases of flight on a free flight model, and that would be the climb, the cruise, and the glide. If you're talking about right climb, right glide, or left climb, left glide, it's a little bit simpler. But to me, the ultimate flight pattern is right climb, left glide. So in order to achieve that, those are the kind of settings I'm talking about. So like a rudder setting is a easy setting adjustment to make. Put in a little right or left rudder, it's going to turn that way. But the issue comes in with the difference on a setting like that under power versus glide. With the prop under full power and the model moving faster, that turn is going to be sharper. So it's kind of a setting that we tend to avoid with free flight. We use it a little bit, but minimal. So an example of a setting that works only in one phase of that flight would be tilting the stabilizer. This is not a lifting stabilizer, I'm just using it for an example, but a lifting stabilizer has an airfoil. If you tilt it, it's going to lift in that direction. So what happens is it'll lift the tail and cause the model to turn. So if you have the left side high, it's going to turn to the left. The interesting thing is that's a very subtle adjustment. Most of our free flight models will have 3 to 5 degrees of down thrust and right thrust, so it doesn't balloon and then scallop on the under power, because it's going to have a power burst and then it's going to have like the cruise phase where it has less power. So you want a level flight in the cruise phase, so that down and right thrust tends to keep it from scalping. But that's a strong adjustment, and it'll certainly overcome the stabilizer tilt. It's just way stronger. So stabilizer tilt's an example of a trim setting that only works in the glide phase. I'm thinking with this airfoil on the rudder, it's not going to be very effective at a slow speed. So it's almost like having a right rudder setting. You have an airfoil that's going to lift that way. So when the model's flying faster, it's like a free setting. It'll turn to the right without having right rudder. And therefore your stabilizer tilt can be effective in the glide, if that makes sense. It's kind of like an art form, flying, and by flying I mean mostly trimming. That's the lost art of free flight, is understanding the trim settings to get a model to fly like it should. A little long-winded, I know, but if you were out in the field and you had a model and you were trying to get it to fly right, I would listen to somebody that knew how to trim a model, and I did. That's the stuff I learned from the old timers that passed it on to me, and that's why I'm sharing it here, pass it on. I always cut long and sand to fit. Tighter fits are stronger glue joints. I say sand a little and check a lot. Take the time to get those good fits. They look nicer and they're stronger. I have all the bottom stringers glued in. I guess you'd call them spars. That's what they call them on the wing. Now I am checking the fit on these ribs. Now when I add these other spars, it's going to create that airfoil. And I can't help but wonder who thought of that. Not how to make an airfoil. Who thought about an airfoil? Basically, this is a flat bottom airfoil on a rudder. Would cause it to turn to the right. I've never seen this before. I guess because I haven't built a model with an airfoil on the rudder. But when I learned about stab tilt, down and right thrust, dethermalizers, 3 phases of flight, how to trim for each phase. You know what they say, when you launch a free flight model, it's lost until you get it back in your hands, which is kind of true. You have no control over it for the entirety of the flight. That's the fascination, having it perform even to perfection based on your build, your trim settings, from starting with your test glide all the way to working up in power with your winds. And believe me, those adjustments change as you're going up in winds. What you thought was right sometimes isn't. But did somebody build a crooked plane and then they noticed it was gliding towards the high side and figured out, oh, that's a lift and stabilizer? Did that come before the airfoil on the rudder? Can't help but wonder. Last spar. Okay, that's kind of an interesting construction. the airflow and how this assembly looks. This is split right here. This is a sub rudder. This will get glued to the fuselage. It's because of the dethermalizer. The rudder will kick up. That's these dotted lines right here. So the horizontal stabilizer will be glued right in here, and this will all kick up together.